J. Smith, and you must be Mr. Vassetti. Would you like the tour?
Might as well.
Well, I'm very sad to be selling the dealership to y'all. This is my first investment after I turned pro. But now, it's time for me to move on.
You're leaving town. Not in too much of a hurry, I hope.
No, I'm just coming out of retirement and preparing for my future comeback. The business wasn't too strong, and my staff took it upon themselves to get a bit more creative with the generational wealth. Obviously, I could wind down the business before handing it over. Hell, I could burn the place down if I wanted to. This is prime development land.
Oh, I wouldn't worry about any of that. This place seems perfect.
Yeah, it does. So I take it we have a deal.
Hello there and welcome back to some more Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Today we're continuing on with Let's Play, and this is episode 23. In today's episode we are taking a look at the car showroom asset, also known as the Sunshine Autos asset. For this one, it is an awful lot like the import-export garages from GTA 3. The game tasks you with finding a certain collection of vehicles. You find the vehicles, bring them back to the garage for a cash reward, as well as rewards for completing the lists. There are 4 lists total, with 6 cars in each list, and the first list focuses on lower spec cars. The first car to find is the Rancher SUV. This does not have a fixed spawn point, often spawns in Vice Point. However, I got extremely lucky and found it on the road straight outside the car showroom. That was actually quite lucky. This is one of the trickier cars to find on this list, but as I said, simply drive it into the garage. Doesn't seem to matter what condition it comes in. I guess it affects how much you get paid, but the money on the cars isn't particularly great either way, and that's not of your biggest concern. The next car to find is the Stallion Muscle Car, a return from GTA 3, and looks exactly the same. The spawn point for this one is of course Cone Crazy, which is the side mission. You basically do the side mission, then you can keep the car or get rid of the side mission and keep the car that way. Other than that though, Little Haiti and Little Havana has this car as a spawn. It's a pretty common car, it has to be said. You shouldn't have too much trouble finding a Stallion, it has to be said, unless you get pretty darn unlucky. The next car on the list, however, is a little bit more look-based. It is the Esperanto. There is no fixed spawn for this car. It's most likely to be found in Little Haiti and Havana. I found it in downtown. The way I was doing this is essentially I had one fixed spawn point for mine. In this case, it was a fixed spawn point downtown, which I'll get into in a second. And my constant goal with this was to travel towards that spawn point, and if I saw another car for import-export on the way there, I would grab it. I think this is the best way to do it. Essentially focus on one car, getting to the fixed spawn point for that car, and then just picking up the cars as you go along that route and returning them, and eventually you'll get to that fixed spawn point, pick up that car, and then just polish the rest off. The fixed spawn point I was looking for was the one for the Landstalker, and that is at the downtown dirt track. This one's behind a couple of buildings in the downtown area. A bit hard to find, but there is a side mission involving this car, hence why I was pushing it out of the way of that marker in order to not trigger the side mission, and that's the way to get the Landstalker. Alternatively, they do spawn around town, but I basically went to the downtown spawn point because it seemed a lot easier. And once you're in one, thankfully a few more spawn around, because the Landstalker is a pretty awful handling vehicle, and I managed to roll it on the way to the garage, but I managed to pick up that blue one just there, deliver it into the garage, tickety-boo. Next up we have the Blitzer Compact, which is one of the harder cars on this list to find. Once again, no fixed spawn point for most of the cars on this first list actually. It is most commonly found on the East Island, which does mean you'll have to do a little bit of travelling for this one in order to get it, but once you get it, you should have a pretty alright job of getting it back in one piece. It's actually a pretty good car, the Blitz Compact, in terms of its handling. Simply take it into the garage, and then we only have one more car left to find, and the one car left to find happens to be the most awkward bastard on this list. It is the Idaho, which is a bit of a shame, because I'm fairly certain I saw this car pretty early on in my list hunting and just kept ignoring it, but yeah, it turns out this one is actually probably the rarest car on the whole list to find. The best place to find it is Little Haiti, although it's still a pretty rare vehicle. Other than that, just drive around in other lower spec cars to make this one spawn, maybe. The Esperanto, the Virgo, stuff like that should make this car a little bit easier of a spawn, but still. It's one of those cars which you don't particularly want it when it does spawn around, but the one time you need it, it never spawns. That's the way most of this does go eventually. Anyways, once you complete that list of 6 cars, you get access to the Deluxo sports car inside of the Sunshine Autos garage, and also it completes the asset for this building. Now, unlike Boatyard, you do have to continue on with this asset in order to achieve 100% completion, which does mean we're going to continue on with this, but if you just want to complete the asset to get it out of the way, there you go. If you're just focusing on the story, pretty easy to do, although in fairness that first list can be a bit of a nightmare. List number 2 focuses on mid-tier cars and is actually slightly easier. We begin with the Sentinel 4-door Saloon, which literally spawns inside Sunshine Autos. I either think this was a test of the developers seeing how stupid you were, or was an accident to have that car spawn inside there, or they simply didn't think about it when they wrote the list out. Yeah, a bit silly, but that's where the Sentinel is, that's how you grab it, that's the way to do it. Next up, a similar 4-door saloon car, the Washington. No fixed spawn on this one, but it is pretty common to see around Vice City. This one is more common spawn if you're driving around in a 4-door saloon car, think Sentinel, Admiral, something like that. This vehicle is a bit easier, or will show up a little bit more. Again, drop it into the garage. Tickety boo. The Washington, not a bad car. I'd probably still choose an Admiral or a Sentinel over it, but it's not a bad vehicle overall. Next up, interestingly on this list, we have the Sabre muscle car. This one has no fixed spawn, although I seem to find it appears a lot alongside the Stallion, which is another muscle car which we saw on the list 1. So essentially, if you see Stallions around, a Sabre probably won't be too far away. These cars aren't particularly hard to find. Pretty common cars around the city, which is pretty good because they're actually quite fast, even if they are a little bit tricky to drive. Next up, we have another 4-door saloon car. This time it is the Admiral. This one spawns at Vassetti Estate. It actually has an interchangeable spawn with the Stretch Limo. Sometimes the Admiral spawns, sometimes the Stretch spawns. Either way, both of them are needed on this list, so both of them better fit you currently. Other than that, there is also a house on Starfish Island that it spawns in on the western region of that island. Although that can actually be a bit trickier to get out of that household, so yeah, usually the Admiral shouldn't be too hard a car to find, and again, it does spawn at Vassetti Estate occasionally. Speaking of stuff that spawns at Vassetti Estate, the Stretch Limo is the next on our list. That one spawns opposite side of the Infernus, pretty easy vehicle to go ahead and grab. You'd think the Stretch Limo would be quite rare, but with a fixed spawn point right there, it's not too bad. I don't know if this thing actually drives around in traffic too much. I can't say I've ever seen it, to my knowledge. I could be blanking out here, but yeah, no, Stretch Limo, pretty rare car overall, but again, Vassetti Estate has one ready for you to take, which is nice. Awfully nice of the people at Vassetti Estate to have cars that are needed for the Sunshine Autos asset. Next up, we have the Virgo, which is probably the most arsehole car on this list. No fixed spawn. It's another one of those cars, a lot like the Idaho, where it will spawn when you don't want it to, and the one time you need it to, it won't spawn. It does seem to spawn more when you get the Idaho. Other than that, Downtown and Vice Point are your more likely spawn points, but it is still a pretty rare car to find, despite being pretty unspectacular as a piece of automotive technology. Anyways, once you've delivered that car, that is list number 2 completed. For list number 2, you get the Sabre Turbo, which is actually a pretty cool car. One of my favourite looking cars in the game, and a huge upgrade over the normal Sabre, although it's interesting that it's turbocharged here in 1986. Next up is list number 3, high-end vehicles. You'd think this one would be the hardest of the list, but actually it's the easiest list to complete in my opinion. First car is the Comet, which of course spawns at the Leaf Links Golf Course. Other than that, Starfish Island is a pretty common spawn. I got pretty lucky and it spawned right outside. Ignore that crash. Yeah, pretty much all these cars spawn on or near Starfish Island. So if you just keep sort of heading towards Starfish Island, you will eventually pick up all 6 of these vehicles, which is quite useful in all honesty. Next up, we have the Cheetah, which does spawn at the marina where Cortez's boat is there, but alternatively, you can also find it on Starfish Island, although it is a little bit of a tricky vehicle to get out of the house that it's in. A lot of houses in Starfish Island have gates. There's certain ramps to get the cars out, and there's certain ways to get into those buildings, but usually you're just better off finding them on the street, because it is a bit of a faff. Next up, we have the Stinger, once again another car which spawns in the Starfish Island house, but if you don't want to do that, Starfish Island or the Leaf Links Golf Course is most likely to find this vehicle. I actually quite like the Stinger, probably the best handling car in this game because it is front wheel drive, which is strange, but it doesn't have any understeer. So essentially it's a sports car without any of the risk associated with driving a sports car. I'd probably recommend the Stinger in all honesty for some of the faster side missions, which we'll get into in the next episode. Next up we have the Banshee, which once again is available at a Starfish Island house. It's available on Starfish Island, and you can get it on Starfish Island or Ocean Beach. I was actually over here on the East Island looking into the spawn point for another vehicle, but in the end I ended up finding this Banshee and found no fixed spawn point for the car I was actually looking for. Figure that one. There's not a lot of fixed spawn points in this one, which is a bit awkward. GTA 3 had a lot more sort of fixed spawn points for the cars. This game, not so much. It's mostly just sort of sports cars that have fixed spawn points and everything else is sort of left to dry. Speaking of fixed spawn points, the Infernus, Vassetti Estate, easy as pie. You can get it at Cortez's Marina. This thing spawns pretty much everywhere, despite being the fastest vehicle in the game, I believe. But yeah, Vassetti Estate's by far and away the easiest place to pick one of these vehicles up, and it's excellent that it spawns there because the Infernus is an excellent vehicle. Can't really fault it, probably the best car in terms of speed in the entire game, at least to my knowledge anyway. And then after that we have one more car to get, which is the Phoenix. Once again this spawns at a Starfish Island house. I couldn't actually track down the house. I could have swore I've got this car from that house a million times, but it wasn't the one I thought it was. Again, a little bit of a faff to get it out, but other than that, Vice Beach is pretty likely spawn point for this, alternatively Starfish Island when you're driving around in other high-end cars such as the Banshee. Pretty straightforward. Yeah, surprisingly, probably the lowest ranked car on this list was actually the hardest one to find, the Phoenix, but after you've done all that, you get the very not so high-end Sand King as your reward, which is a pretty cool looking vehicle. I do prefer the San Andreas rendition of this vehicle myself, but no, I do like that car a lot. And also it has a bunch of sponsors on it which have hilarious names relating to real life sponsors. Next up, list number 4. These are the oddballs, and this is where I spent most of my time because of one specific vehicle I'll get into in a second. But first up, we have the baggage handler. This is available at the airport. The airport's literally right next to the Sunshine Auto showroom, so other than the fact that you have to drive the baggage handler back, which is kind of bad because it's incredibly slow, this vehicle is not hard to track down whatsoever. It's probably the only time in the entire game that you'll use a baggage handler for any purpose whatsoever, and thankfully you don't have to drive it very far because it sucks. Next up, we have the Mr. Whoopie. This is only available when you buy the Ice Cream Cherry Popper Factory, so I do, like, you're gonna have to buy it anyway for doing the asset mission that we did in the last episode, and you're gonna have to buy it to do this, so yeah, either way you have to buy the Ice Cream Factory to complete this asset, and you may as well do the asset missions for the Ice Cream Factory while you're over there. Makes sense? Good. Anyways, this vehicle's not particularly hard to get back to the place, although do bear in mind, if you do destroy these, you have to go back to the Cherry Popper Ice Cream Factory because it's the only spawn point for this vehicle in the entire game, including in traffic. It doesn't spawn in traffic, only spawns there, but that's pretty fine because it's not a particularly long drive. Not like trying to find the damn ice cream van in GTA 3 was, which was a nightmare. Next up, we have the Pizza Boy scooter, which is available at any well-stacked pizza company place. Just grab it from there and there you go. The only two-wheel transportation actually required by the showroom, which is weird, but there you go. Now, I'm not quite sure what use the Sunshine Autos would have for a Pizza Boy, but either way, they want it, and we got it. So just drop it off there, and there you go. Next up, oh boy, this one wasn't fun, the golf cars. This one is historically quite easy for me. Just show up to Leaf Links Golf Course, hang around for a little bit, and eventually one will drive past you. However, I spent 50 minutes, I think it was, looking for this thing. It wouldn't spawn at Leaf Links Golf Course. It wouldn't spawn on the actual golf course. No golfers were driving it. In the end, I ended up entering the cheat to see if it would spawn. Of course, as you saw, I got this one organically. Yeah, it was a faff. Don't worry, I didn't like save the game with the cheat code enabled or anything like that to my knowledge. You know, I certainly didn't use the cheated caddy to get to Sunshine Autos with, but yeah, that was a strangely hard one to get. I've never had that much trouble with Golf Caddy before. Next up, we have the Cuban Hermes, which is very common around Little Havana, because it's the Cuban gang car. As you see, the poor Cuban bastard who is driving it got dragged out by a bunch of Haitians, but his loss is our gain, I guess, as I ended up stealing his car. The Cuban Hermes is pretty cool, spits fire, definitely the cooler of the two gang cars in this game. Also interesting to note that it's called the Cuban Hermes, despite the fact that the game has the anti-Cuban thing going on. I'm surprised they didn't just call it Gang Hermes, but there you go. And finally, on our list of vehicles, a very easy one to get, the Voodoo. This one is incredibly common in traffic in Little Haiti, because of course that's where the Haitian gang members patrol. This is a Haitian gang car. It's also parked at Auntie Paulette's house. So yeah, you've got a fixed spawn point, you've got them driving around in traffic, you can't get any easier than that, and thankfully it is a very easy car to just get to the Sunshine Autos and drop off, and there you go. And with all that said and done, finally, that is the end of the Sunshine Autos asset missions, and you're one step closer to 100% complete. Your reward for all that is the Hot Ring Racer, which is a very cool car, and also $9,000 of revenue generated at Sunshine Autos. Can't go wrong there. Anyways, thank you all very much for watching this edition of Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Do hope you've enjoyed. Next time I'm going to be taking a look at the Vice City Street Racer, so join us for that. Until then, farewell.
You know the fear, the sorrow that my heart holds in knowing just where my hopes and dreams are going. I'll only you bear. Got up in a wall that you are not part of. Eyes on the slit of your face.